It's Wednesday, the 20th of May. God bless you today. This week we're in Mental Health Awareness Week. Something we don't really find that easy to talk about, whether in church or outside of church, or whether as a male or a female, and the idea to admit that actually we might be struggling with something. We believe in victory, don't we? We believe in our relationship with Christ and of overcoming. And we talk about Jesus' resurrection and life from death. But actually, therefore, we find it really tricky then to understand, how does mental health come into that? How does affliction and anxiety and depression all fit into this? I've been reading this week about Charles Haddon Spurgeon. Charles Haddon Spurgeon. Now, when I think of Spurgeon, he was a great Baptist preacher, probably the greatest Baptist preacher of all time. And his enthusiasm and his wave of church planting, in fact, led to Chatsworth Baptist Church being built in 1877-78. And when I think of Spurgeon, I think of this great big man, this sort of bombastic preacher, who loved life and food, it looked like, and had a great beard and smoked cigars and, was a man's man in many ways. To find out that Spurgeon suffered with depression most of his adult life. He had inflammatory kidney disease. He had anxiety. He suffered with stress. Today, looking at some of Spurgeon's conditions, we'd probably say he suffered from clinical depression. Charles Haddon Spurgeon, the greatest Baptist preacher of all time, had mental health difficulties. And we need to understand that. Charles Spurgeon struggled with it, as we might, and as perhaps we do. And he brought it to God and to understand, and in praying and seeking, he began to think about how, if we expect to be crowned with a gold crown, and yet Christ was crowned with thorns. If we want to be like Christ, then perhaps we're going to also have to suffer like Christ. These are challenges, aren't they? And in all of this, we know that Spurgeon took practical help. To escape the darkness and the dirt and the cold of London, he escaped to the French Riviera. Wow, if only we could at the moment, eh? But he went out to experience sunshine and light and warmth, to walk in the countryside. He wrote about the joys of smoking, that it seemed to relieve some pressure in him. And that actually he took some practical steps to help relieve his symptoms and what he was going through. And in spiritual steps, he began to understand in terms of walking with Christ and how we might be taken through the furnace, how we might be refined in the fire, how he too struggled and said, things like, I pity the dog that suffers like me. He struggled. But in that, he knew something of the peace and the blessing of Christ. That he understood that when we come to Christ, in many ways, Christ isn't interested in our strength. He's interested in our weakness. He visits Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego in the fire. He meets with them in the fire. And as he meets with us in our walk and our difficulty, Christ comes alongside us, not just to walk with us, but to bear our burden too. So God bless you today and this week. That mental health struggles are there for all of us. If they could be there for the greatest Baptist preacher of all time, who could struggle with depression all of his adult life and various physical infirmities too, it's likely that we too will face such difficulty. But we know that Christ has been through this before us. He has walked this path. He too has suffered. He has empathy and he has compassion, and he will help us to bear us up through this time. Let us pray. Lord, we turn to you at these times. Lord, when we think about this hashtag kindness matters, that we may know your kindness, Lord, that through our struggles that you will walk with us and bear our burdens, but that we will be kind to ourselves and we will be kind to each other, that we will understand more about mental health and how we engage with you, Lord, and with each other, that how we may seek peace with you and peace with each other. Come, Lord, and meet us where we are at this moment. And we ask this in your precious name, Lord. Amen.